In today's episode, guys, we're going to talk about suspension. More particularly, my suspension. We're going to talk about how it's been, what it is, and should you be getting this. So stay tuned, guys. If you guys have been following the channel for a while, you guys will know that it's been almost 2 years since I lifted the Jeep. That's right, I lifted the Jeep. This Jeep is sitting on a TeraFlex ST3 3.5-inch bolt-on lift kit that I did in my garage almost 2 years ago with simple tools. And so it's been almost 2 years. I thought it is time to have a review video, tell you guys what has been great about it, what hasn't been great about it, and would I do it again? And should you look into this suspension and do it yourself? Now, I'm going to start by saying TeraFlex is not a sponsor of this channel. They're not a sponsor of this video. I bought, paid for, and did all this myself after tons and tons of research. So this is my own thought process. This is what has been going on with it. And there are some pros, some cons, some issues, and some great things that have happened with having this suspension on this Jeep. Without further ado, we're going to first get into what this suspension is, how it's been working, the issues and pros that I have had, and then my final thoughts on it. That's how this video is going to go. So let's get into what actually is the suspension. All right, guys, as I said before, this is a TeraFlex Sport ST3 3.5-inch bolt-on suspension. What does that mean? One, it comes from TeraFlex, but it is a complete bolt-on suspension that you can do in your own garage. And in fact, I did do it. Now, there are a couple things about this suspension I need to know off the bat. First off, it is a bolt-on suspension that requires 2 holes to be drilled. And I'll talk about what you need to do that in a second. The second is this suspension does not come with shocks. Or, and I'm going to include this in here because I did it at the same time, a steering stabilizer. It does not come with those. Those are something else you have to buy separately to go with this suspension kit. Now, Falcon is what TeraFlex uses, and that is what I used. And it isn't just any Falcon shock, it is their, and I have my notes here, their SP2 3.3 fast adjustable piggyback shocks. That's what I have on the front, on the rear. And then the steering stabilizer is the Falcon Nexus 2.2 fast adjustable steering stabilizer. I went with those, and I'll get into all of that, why I chose those in a second. But that is what is on this Jeep. But as I said, this was a complete bolt-on kit that required 2 holes. And those 2 holes require this, which you'll come in closer in a second. This is a step drill bit. This is what I used to drill the 2 little holes. And these 2 little holes went for the brackets for your quick disconnect sway bar linkage on the passenger side, and also it's on the passenger side for the torsion bar bracket that helps raise it up. Now, what do you get in all these in this kit? This bolt-on suspension kit, you get the springs, brackets to lower the control arms front and rear, a bracket to raise the torsion bar up, you get brand new sway bar connection links, you get the whole 9 yards minus the shocks. Buy the shocks yourself. You can choose almost any aftermarket shock guys that you want, as long as it goes with your suspension. What do I mean by that? This is a 3.5-inch suspension. These shocks are designed for a 3.5 to 4-inch suspension lift. So when I say you can use almost any aftermarket shock, you do not have to use the shocks that company uses. Don't get me wrong. For TeraFlex, they use Falcon. Falcon is what they use to help design this suspension, and it complements it well. But I could have used any aftermarket shock as long as it was for a 3.5 or to a 4-inch suspension upgrade. It would have bolted in here, been super nice, and worked an absolute treat for this. But I decided to stick with what was supposed to be compatible for this lift. And that's it. It came in a bunch of boxes and I put it all together, and I have a video of sort of the process that I went through. But that was that simple, guys. It was bolt-on and it was simple tools. I have a little Craftsman toolkit that is what I used. Now with this, I will admit, I did have to buy some new sockets in the sense of from 19 millimeter to 25 millimeter. Those sockets in between, 6 sockets, because there are a few bolts on here that were a 22 mil, a 21 mil, and a 24 millimeter. So it was nice to know those. The other thing I had to go and do when I put this suspension on was I had to go to my local auto parts store and rent some spring collapsers for the rear springs, because I could not get the body of the Jeep high enough with my jack stands and the axle of the Jeep rear low enough with my floor jack to slip the springs on. So I did have to get and rent some spring collapsers. But it was that simple, guys. It took me about 3 days to do this whole suspension lift on my own with some simple tools, jacks, jack stands, and this little trusty drill bit. That's all it took. Now, this suspension lift should have lifted the Jeep 3.5 inches, roughly, giving it about 3.5 inches of ground clearance. And it did. It truly did. It provided quite a bit of ground clearance for the Jeep. And it was great. Having these Falcon adjustable shocks, guys, the reason I went with it is because I wanted to be able to adjust it to either being really firm or soft. And the reason for that is when the Jeep is loaded out, she be heavy. She's very heavy, and when the weight shifts, she shifts it hard. Being able to adjust the shocks to be a bit stiffer, when the Jeep shifts its weight, that motion is very much counteracted by the shock, which helps keep it stable. And that's what I wanted, because when I first took it off-road in its softest settings, the C, boy, she swayed crazy. It wasn't great. Stiffening up the shocks, boom, solved all of it, got rid of it. The other nice thing about this suspension, and particularly this lift kit, was the Jeep still drove and rode like stock. It wasn't a big change from the stock Rubicon suspension that was on here. She still handled the same. She felt the same on the road. A little bit different when she was loaded out, but after I adjusted the shocks, felt completely like stock, and that is actually what I liked. I liked the fact that it was like stock. It didn't feel all kind of wonky and overweighted or top heavy. It just felt planted and like stock. The other thing that was nice about this suspension kit is that it was bolt-on minus 2 holes that you had to drill. There was no fabricating, there was no cutting, there was no changing, there was no big, huge manipulation to the actual Jeep's suspension layout. You just took old parts off, put on newer parts, bolted it together, and boom, bam, bang, here she is. Now, I didn't get anything else apart from the shocks, the steering stabilizer, and this lift kit. TeraFlex does create different, upper and lower control arms for the front and the rear, and a few other little things that you can do to this suspension. That was a lot more moolah than I had to give, so I didn't go with it. This was more of a budget lift kit and budget style build, and that's what I went with, and it is how it is. I'm not gonna lie. It was very much budget, but it worked for what I needed, and it was fantastic. Now, though it's worked, and I've had all these great things to say, there are some issues that I have encountered and ran into with this suspension, and I think we need to get into them because they have been a bit of a frustration. Let's start with the less irritable and get to the absolute constant bane of my existence when I'm off-road. So starting with not so bad, but something that has crept up. That is not 3.5 extra inches a lift anymore. No, not even freaking close. This sits about as high as Rudy's Jeep with 2 inches a lift. Yeah. The back springs on the suspension lift The fronts are 140 pounds. The rears are 170 pounds. They are not strong enough to lift the butt of the Jeep up with the weight that I have for my adventuring. On trails like the Mojave, Southern California, Idaho BDR, going up into Oregon, simple scenic drives. That's plenty. That's great. Going to Southern Utah and hitting Moab, this last trip, I was rubbing the fenders more than I ever have. This thing was not articulating very well, and she just kept hitting the rear on everything. Now, when I first did this suspension lift, I took it to Moab and conquered some trails as a shakeout, and it didn't do any of that, and I couldn't figure out why this trip was. And then Rudy and I, sitting around a campfire one night, were reminiscing through our phones of old pictures, and I was showing them of the trails that we did when I first did the suspension, and we realized this suspension in the back sat way higher, about here, off the ground. She has lost a lot of her room to travel. Now, don't get me wrong, the Jeep setup is a little lighter on the inside than it was back then, but the top is heavier. I now have this lovely rooftop tent on top that's 200 and plus pounds up there. Shouldn't be that big of a deal, but apparently it is for these springs. And so it has caused me to have to figure out a solution to this. Solution being, I got to get some bigger, stronger springs for the rear of the Jeep. But it has been a new issue that has arisen that is kind of annoying, to find out that the butt of the Jeep actually is squatting because the springs cannot help lift it up. Also on this last adventure, because the springs are no longer kind of holding the weight as nicely, the rear shocks are working a heck of a lot harder to stop the weight from shifting, which I did notice a lot more shifting on this last Moab trip. But that has kind of been the issue in the rear. It's new. For the trips that I have the rest of the year, it's fine. There are solutions to it. It's just a little annoying. Now, let's move up and let's talk about some of the pains in my rear that I've had since I put this on. Okay, welcome to where the pain of my existence is. And I understand you guys probably aren't going to see this super clearly from this shot. I'm going to bring you guys in way closer. Don't worry. There are two pains in my rear. One is the bane of my existence that I've had issues with ever since I put this kit on. And it doesn't matter, it just is such a pain in the butt. The second is a bit of a pain in the butt, but I kind of fixed that problem. It just took a little bit of thinking. You probably won't think so, but at the time it took some thinking. So remember those two little brackets I talked about that you had to put holes for? The lovely sway bar quick disconnect bracket and your torsion bar bracket? Pains in my ass. I'm going to say it just like that. It's been a pain in my ass. The torsion bar on the passenger side, it's right here. Like I said, you guys probably can't see it. This bolt originally in the instructions is facing the other way. If it's facing the other way, you can't tighten it and torque it down, which means it kept coming loose and the torsion bar was willy-nilly sliding on that bolt and really wasn't doing anything to help the Jeep. And so the Jeep would clunk every time the wheels turned or it flexed. It was annoying. I had to disassemble the whole bracket just to spin the bolt around so I could put the nut on this side to torque the hell out of it and Loctite it down. Ever since then, I fixed it. But it took a bit of work because the bracket doesn't like the nut or the bolt going the way it is now with the nut sticking to the front of the Jeep. It wants it going backwards. Yeah. It was a little bit of a pain. The bane of my existence is this stupid quick disconnect for the sway bar. Now let's get into why this suspension has this really, really quickly. This suspension is not just designed for a particular style of Jeep. My Jeep's a Rubicon. It has an electronic sway bar disconnect. This is built and designed for any Jeep, Wrangler JL, 4-door, unlimited. So some do not have a sway bar quick disconnect, sway bar electronic disconnect, so they made it so it's a quick disconnect with a little pin and nut, or pin and washer that holds it in place. Great in theory. I wish it was a little more specific to the Rubicon so that you didn't need that. The little tiny, call it slide on, slide off bolt that this sits on so that you can quickly disconnect and reconnect it on this passenger side. I've had zero issues with the driver's side, only with this side. Under any force, and when I say any force, I mean the road, a scenic dirt trail, Moab. Any force hits this side on that tire, that nut comes loose, which means that little bolt that the thing sits on comes loose. And it will literally go clunk, 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 and get louder and louder, but the nut will never actually come off because the nut sits up against the torsion bar bracket. So because it sits on that torsion bar bracket, the nut can't actually come off. But it is annoying as all hell because you cannot get a tool in there enough to fully tighten it up. I have tried. I have to tighten it up every effing trip that I go on. It is a constant bane of my existence. I hate it so much, it's ridiculous. But I do have to tighten it every single time. Now, I have attempted to come around this a little bit, and I'm going to try two different things. First off, I do have some new bolts, washer and nut, to just sandwich this little thing on and get rid of the whole quick disconnect aspect. I have that. What I did do at the moment, because I have not installed that, is I had to take that whole bracket off, loosen it, Loctite it, and torque it down so that it is torqued to spec, and put it back on here. Now that it is super tight again, because I haven't been able to do that on the trail, it hasn't been moving so far on the road. I'm going to permanently fix this problem, but that is the biggest pain in the ass about this whole suspension are these quick disconnects. Don't get me wrong, if you have a Jeep that doesn't have an electronic sway bar disconnect, it's gonna be wonderful for you. But for a Rubicon that has the electronic sway bar disconnect, it is a constant pain because you just, on the trail, you can't get it tight enough to stay in place, and the second force hits it, it just comes loose. And it has happened every single trip ever since I first put this on. It has been such a pain. And so that is my biggest complaint on this whole suspension. All right, those are my cons. And honestly, guys, having 3 cons about this whole suspension over the past 2 years isn't too bad. Like I said, the stuff at the front has been happening every trip since I put this together. And I solved one of them. I'm about to solve the second one, and hopefully that solves it. And then this happening in the rear is more recent once again. The rooftop tent is heavier than the ground tent and everything else I used to toss up here. And 2 guys, when me and my dad go on an adventure and we take the Jeep, I'm going to be honest, we load her out. So them back springs have been getting a lot of work over the past 2 years. They're just not designed for this. Now, my final thoughts. I absolutely like this suspension. I have to be honest. Even with these little issues that I have, guys, it is such a, inexpensive, if you will, suspension upgrade that you can do in your garage with simple tools. It truly is. It did not take a whole lot of sophistication and hard work on my part to do this. Some of this stuff was really tight and it did take some work to get it off, but it wasn't hard. And at least for TeraFlex, I cannot speak on other companies, their instructions are so crystal clear and so well done. It really made doing this simple. There was no how is this supposed to, the instructions literally Barney walk you through how to do this, which is wonderful. And so I do like this suspension. It works great. Now, as time has gone by, obviously, it's been 2 years, certain things need a little bit of attention, hence the rear springs. If you are somebody that just rock crawls, weekend warrior, wants her to sit up a little higher so you can have that articulation, this is going to be great for you. It truly will. Any kind of like 3.5 to 4 inch lift is going to be really, really great for you. Now, one thing to note with this, the biggest tire you can stick on this suspension lift is a 37, with 35 being ideal. I don't run 37s, guys. I run 35s. It works wonderful with 35s. 37s, you probably need a taller lift than this one, just because if you're going to get flexy, it's going to rub bad on both the front and rear. I can tell you right now, it will. But otherwise, guys, if you're one of those kind of people, this is great. If you are on a budget and your setup really isn't too heavy, it's still great. If you are somebody that's kind of like me, that longer adventures, lot heavier of a load, this suspension may not be for you. In a sense of, you might want to look into something that has designed for a little more weight to be on the Jeep all the time and can handle it. That's one of the flaws with this, is at the time my Jeep setup wasn't so heavy, I didn't think I needed one of those kind of suspension lifts. Looking back and how the Jeep is now, it'd probably be better to have one of those. However, it is what it is. I'm still happy with it, and it still works for me. And that comes down to you. It's up to you. Like I said, they're not a sponsor of the channel. I'm not telling you to get this. This is just, over the past 2 years, this suspension has worked great, guys. It has allowed me to tackle some harder trails in Moab that I normally wouldn't have been able to do in a stock Jeep. It is a nice enough lift that it's not ugly looking on the road. It's aesthetically pleasing, and it works for the tire size that I have. And 2, budget, did it in my garage by myself, no help. You can do it. And if that's something you can do, it's a wonderful option, guys. The instructions were so clear. And I know there are tons of different lift kits out there that are bolt-on, different heights, different kits for different requirements. This works for me. Eventually, will I keep this long term? Probably not. This whole suspension, I'm going to start with upgrading the springs and seeing how it goes, but she probably has another year or 2 of this suspension, and then I'm going to have to upgrade it to a much stronger, heavy-duty weight suspension that can handle the weight of the Jeep and doing the trails that I want to do with it. Yes, there are other solutions. Get lighter. I like my rooftop tent. I'm not getting rid of my rooftop tent now. And my setup on the inside, I have cut the weight in half on the inside with everything, so I'm not sacrificing any of my other comforts, because I'm not going to. It's my life. I'm going to do it my way. But for now, I'm going to wheel her. I'm still going to use it. I still have years to go and so many other adventures this year that this whole thing's going to take me on. Now, whether I upgrade the springs before the next few trips or not, another story. I'm debating. But thank you all so much for joining me in this video. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out immensely, and you guys are what makes this channel happen. So go ahead and hit that button if you haven't already. Otherwise, I hope you found this video helpful, and this is a great option, guys, out there. If you would like to, go check them out. I'll have links in the description below, so you guys can just click on it, and you can read it all off of the TeraFlex website yourself. Otherwise, until the next time, guys, take care.